In this video, we're going to take a look at one of Tegrity's newest features, which is remote proctoring. To get started, log into Blackboard and find the course for which you want to enable remote proctoring in Tegrity. Next, click on the Tegrity classes link for that course and launch the Tegrity Viewer window. Once the window is open, look towards the bottom of the screen and find the Actions menu dropdown. From this menu, select the Settings option. Your screen should now refresh and you should be looking at a settings area just like the one I have on screen. At the bottom of the settings area are two options. One is called Enable Student Testing or Remote Proctoring Mode. Check the box here. Next is an option that you can enable if you want to also display a course testing policy. In our example, we're going to enable that and also add some information for students in terms of what they're going to need to be able to take the test. I have a few items written up, so let's copy and paste those into this particular area. So number one, we're going to mention to students that they need a webcam or camera that is connected to their computer before they can take this test. We might also specify that students will need admin rights on their computer to take this test. The first two items are critical to Tegrity because students will need to take a picture to enable the testing process, and two, the Tegrity recorder requires admin rights before they can actually begin. We may also specify that students need to hold up a valid student identification card when they're prompted to take a photograph, and that students without a valid or matching ID will not be graded. Last but not least, you may want to specify a certain time or date by which these recordings must be completed. Next, we're ready to save our settings, but before we do so, notice that there's a couple tabs here at the bottom. We are currently set to Design. Let's click on HTML for a second, and then back to Design again. This little step is to ensure that our settings here or our text is saved correctly. Next, click OK to save your settings. It's always a good idea to verify that your settings did take correctly, so let's jump back one more time to the settings area and verify that all our settings are correct and all our instructions to the students are also in place. We see that they are, so let's hit OK, and we are now done and ready to allow students to begin taking tests remotely. So now let's take a look at the student view of the testing process. So before they start their test, the student would be required to log into Blackboard and open up the course for which they're going to take their test and start the Tegrity recorder. So to get started, they would click on Tegrity Classes, and this would launch the new Tegrity Classes window for them. Because we have now enabled remote proctoring, they get a little tab called Tests up in the upper right-hand corner of their screen. When they roll over this tab, they see a Start New Test option. They'll click on it and are shown the course testing policy that we put in just a few minutes ago. So now that the students have their instructions, they can click Accept, and they will likely be prompted to install this Tegrity Runner app. They will have to click Allow, and the Tegrity Recorder app is then installed. Next, students will get the screen and will be required to have a webcam. Notice that in my example, this webcam is already connected, but I could have just as easily toggled to a different one if necessary. It's probably also a good idea to enable the audio, so they will need to select the default audio device. In this case, I have several input sources, and I'm going to select the Revo Labs X-Tag. The students would, of course, select an audio device that they have, which is maybe a headset or a desktop mic. And this is just to ensure that they are working by themselves. Once they've got both set up, they can just hit Next, and Tegrity is going to prompt them to take a picture. So the student at this point will probably likely take a picture of themselves. They may hold up an ID to verify that that is indeed them. And once they're ready, they can just hit Take Photo and then hit Next. Once they're ready, they'll hit Start. And in a couple seconds, they will see the Tegrity recorder appear at the bottom of their screen. They can now proceed to continue to take their tests. So their next steps would be to essentially open up the testing area that you've set up for them, because the tests are actually not administered within Tegrity. Remember that all Tegrity is doing is capturing every single thing that the student's doing on screen. So if they had a test set up within this course, they would essentially go back to that test and begin taking the test. So if we were to pretend that we had a test set up under course content, they would go there, start to take their test, and once they were done, all they would have to do is hit the stop button that appears within the Tegrity recorder at the bottom of their screen. So I currently had my toolbar set up to the right of my screen. I've now switched that to include the bottom of the screen. So when I hit stop, I get a prompt that says, do I want to end the recording? I would normally do this if I were a student once I'm done taking my test, and then I would hit yes. Tegrity would then process this recording and upload it. It does keep a screen up that shows you, or dialog window, I'm sorry, up that shows you how far along it is in terms of uploading that particular recording. The students would therefore need to keep their internet connection active. Once the recording has uploaded, they get an uploaded successfully message, and then they can hit close. Now let's switch back to what the professor would actually see if they were logging in to check on these. So let's jump back to what our professor's view looks like. So notice that we have a list of all the recordings that we created, but now we also have a tab called tests. So once again, this is of course the instructor view. The instructor would then click on the tab called tests and would see the two different, or the recordings that were actually created. So we see that there was one made by a student called Tech Student. The instructor could then click on this and then of course see the recording or see what the student was doing during the test taking process. You'll notice that a second one just appeared. This was the one that we created a couple seconds ago. The one we're looking at right now is actually a sample recording that I created earlier this morning. You can then play back the recording just like you would any other recording. And of course I get a prompt on screen here because I don't have the plugin installed for Firefox. But in a normal scenario, you would be able to play this back just fine. So once you're done, you can exit out of Tegrity just like you normally would. And as you can see, it's a pretty standard and safe process. The critical things to remember when you are using remote proctoring with your students are: one, the student will need a mic and a webcam to be able to do the remote process. And more importantly, they will also need administrator rights on their computer, as well as a good broadband connection to be able to upload these recordings. Remember that if you're giving your students an hour-long test, what Tegrity is essentially doing is creating an hour-long recording, a video recording of that test taking process. The students will then be required to upload that, which does take a good broadband connection. Students on dial-up are unlikely to be able to use this process. So those are some of the caveats to keep in mind if you want to use remote proctoring and allow students to be able to take these exams off campus. This is the end of the tutorial.